Meryl Streep. Julie and Julia?
Nope. Do you want me to give one of them so we can get going with the podcast?
Yeah.
One is Out of Africa. That is apparently the number one above Devil Wears Prada.
I can see that.
Number 3, August, Osage County.
I was going to guess that. I couldn't remember the fucking name because that was such a bad movie.
I have no idea what that is. And number 4...
Oh, no, you would love it. It's just grimdark on a theme of maternal cancer.
Oh, I don't like that.
Matriarchal cancer. That's much more fun.
Oh, goodness. And then number 4
it's a good play.
Number 4 is Doubt.
Okay, yeah. I mean, none of those are her strongest work. But then again, she hasn't done any of her strongest work in this millennium.
Yeah.
I actually had a blurb about this in my notes.
Do you really?
Yes. Because the acting style of this film was worthy of comment, I feel.
Okay. I did not write copy for an intro to the movie. Give me like 2 seconds.
Hi, my name is Kyle Pika.
Oh, no, I can get that part. It's more the description. It's okay. I can probably wing it.
Oh, well, actually, how to describe this movie is pretty funny because there's no real way of describing it without accidentally narrativizing it in a way that the film doesn't do.
Yeah, that's true.
Like I want to know what they wrote on the back of the DVD.
It's a fucking trip.
Yeah,
Charlie Kaufman. You know what you're getting yourself into.
It's a Charlie Kaufman movie that has another Charlie Kaufman movie as a scene in the movie about the Charlie Kaufman. Like, meta is an abused term, but this movie is sort of the apex.
It's from 2000.
Why are we not recording this?
We are recording.
Are we?
Yeah.
Mine says it's not. Oh, we are live. Okay, so the little button trigger changed.
Start it off.
All right. Welcome back. What are we calling our viewers? Ducklings.
No, ducklings are a little...
Oh, you're right.
Gray ducklings.
What are female ducks? It's mallards and what?
Ducks. We're probably called hens.
Mallards and ducks.
We'll do that. We'll go with that.
All about the length of the U.
All right, welcome back, ducks.
I live.
Welcome, mallards and hens, to another installment of Duck, Duck, Grey Duck. That's funny.
We are not calling our listeners hens. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're calling some of them mallards. It's fine.
We need a gender-neutral term then.
Ducks?
Also, I think mallards is a species.
Oh, you're probably right about that. I'm just a dumbass. Okay, so...
Guys, we need to do a podcast episode that is just leveling up our knowledge of ducks. Like, we need to do a documentary like a Nat Geo on ducks.
You know what they call that? Great. A documentary.
You know, Connor.
So that's been our review of Adaptation.
For score. And
Kyle, do you want to do the intro copy? You do it better.
No, it's your movie.
I know, but then I can do it. I can do it from there. Okay, fine.
This is your cross to bear, duck.
All right.
Excuse me. Gray duck.
Gray duck.
Duck.
All right. Hold on, I'm getting in the zone. Stop talking. All right. Welcome back to another episode of Duck, Duck, Grey Duck. I am Connor, your host for this week. Joining me as usual is Kyle.
Hello.
And Chris.
Howdy.
So this block is our Nicolas Cage block. Long awaited by all three fans of the show. We're going to be exploring films featuring Nicolas Cage that have been deemed good, bad, and altogether Nick Cagey. So before we get into this week's movie, let's talk about what a Nicolas Cage movie is. And I think we should have no care with using movie or film as being one of the most prolific actors of our time. Everything that Nicolas Cage touches is in the most capital F term of film. So Kyle, I think you had some thoughts about this, about what defines the Nick Caginess of a movie.
Well, yeah, I think like what makes a Nick Cage film, besides the like tautological statement of it's a movie with Nick Cage in it, it kind of varies with time. Like I don't know if his early career was that remarkable, honestly. Like he was just sort of an actor doing his thing. Like obviously celebrity caliber, but not altogether the most interesting person in this field. And it's this later career that I think of as the era of the Nick Cage movie. And for me, there's like a sense of uncanniness about his performances where they're either too small or too big or not bothered enough. And it becomes really, really fascinating to see the very, very particular way in which he either over or underdoes a given role. And that's definitely part of what makes a Nick Cage film for me. There's also the like not trivial fact that a large number of his movies are not very good. So there's an aspect of Nick Cage movies where he is always delivering something that is either out of scope with the demands of the movie on either the high or the low end, while also being distinctly Nick Cagey. I know it's like, again, we resort to this tautology, but it's that uncanniness that I think is really fascinating. Oops, sorry.
Chris?
So Nick Cage he's one of those actors or has become one of those actors. And it's really interesting watching Adaptation because I have all these notions growing up with National Treasure 2, like Ghost Rider, the Bees meme. What's the most recent movie I saw him in aside from this one? The Left Behind adaptation. And he just becomes this like, he's not playing a character. He is Nick Cage in movie. And then going back and watching him in a drama role, I can't quite break that. So I guess what I mean to say is what makes a Nick Cage movie is that it's fiction around Nick Cage. That makes sense?
Yeah, so there's been like this sort of cult built around him on the internet for how bad his recent movies have been. I will say I would like to hear from some of our older viewers about how they view Nick Cage, because I think it's important to note that, like Kyle said, like he didn't have many memorable roles, but his early roles weren't necessarily bad. So like when people talk about Valley Girl or Raising Arizona, things like that, or like even Face Off, it's not with a whole lot of disgust or like, the same sort of way we look at Nick Cage as this terrible hammy or extremely under hammy actor. But people who have been around to track his filmic career since the beginning can probably give more insight into his gradual descent into, all right, these bills aren't going to pay themselves roles, from roles that, he got to work with the Coen brothers. That's a pretty cool honor in a lead role for a very, very bizarre but still fun character, into Ghost Rider 3, My Skull is Still on Fire, who is still funding these movies.
Oh,
yeah. To clarify, I don't think he's a bad actor.
Agreed.
I just think he makes really, really interesting choices. And I think like because of those choices, he's super distinctive. Like he is a celebrity, even though most of what he does nowadays is like B grade. And I think there's something about his particular flavor of celebrity where it's just so in your face that no matter what he does, the movie gets a layer of meta on top of it, right? Mm-hmm. Like casting celebrities in roles is always going to take you out of the role a little bit because they're celebrities. You notice, oh, that's Tom Cruise. Oh, wait, but this is a Mission Impossible movie, right? With Nick Cage, it's real hard to get past that. Like, you remain very much aware of the fact that he is Nick Cage the entire time, which makes his casting in this particular movie super interesting, right? It's like perfect casting.
Agreed.
Yeah. I think his voice adds a distinct element too, kind of like Tommy Wiseau, but on a more muted scale. He has a odd kind of accentless affect or
He doesn't open
inflection on
his
some of his
mouth.
words. Yeah, and he takes odd pauses too. So that adding another layer of distinction. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get into this week's movie, which was Adaptation. So Adaptation was directed by Spike Jonze and written by Charlie Kaufman as an adaptation of Susan Orlean's book, The Orchid Thief. So the movie simultaneously follows Charlie Kaufman's anxious breakdown after the success of Being John Malkovich, as he's beginning to adapt The Orchid Thief. While we look at Charlie Kaufman's sort of descent into self-doubt and an inferiority complex in the face of his expected success, the development of the adaptation alongside the movie. But as Charlie begins to doubt his ability to write and begins to compete with his fictionalized twin brother, Donald Kaufman, we see the adaptation become more or less faithful without really becoming aware of what is Charlie, the character's writing, and what is Charlie, the writer's writing. It's a movie that one of my coworkers described as very easy to understand and insanely difficult to talk about. And I think that you guys would probably agree with that.
So let's try to do it.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's just do first impressions as we always do. Chris, you want to start?
Yeah. So I really need to do. I try to go into these movies like, oh, I'm not going to know anything about it, and I really need to start looking up things before we watch them, because had I known that this was written by Charlie Kaufman, aside from his name being Charlie Kaufman, it would have prepared me, I guess, for. I didn't know anything about this movie, and I forgot everything that I read when we first talked about doing it. When I watched it this morning, so I was really confused because they started talking about John Malkovich, and I was like, "But that's a real movie," and I was like, "Okay." And then, so I was along for the ride by the belt of my seat, or whatever the idiom is. Definitely not that.
Try and say that one more time, because that was very entertaining.
I was there by the belt of my seat and seat of my pants. I honestly,
Yes,
I don't
there
know.
one.
There it is. And
I'm gonna use that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's kind of better.
Yeah, so as far as Nick Cage goes, I really enjoyed his performance as both Charlie and Donald, and I was really impressed. Maybe 2002 had better technology than I'm getting it credit for, but it seemed pretty seamless. And one thing I will add to every Nick Cage film has to have is dated special effects, because some of the CGI was not the best. Yeah, like your buddy said, easy to watch. Well, not easy to watch, easy to understand while you're watching. And I had such a hard time separating fact from fiction afterwards. Yeah, so I'm still digesting. I was depressed, but also not after watching this movie, so I think I liked it.
All right, Kyle.
Yeah, I think I liked it as kind of the camp that I'm willing to pitch my tent in as well. I thought the beginning was really, really interesting.
The opening scene in particular, or
just dividing this into acts would take a PhD thesis, so I'm not going to do that. But if we take I think there is a way that you can think of it as sort of beginning, middle, and end. I thought the opening monologue where he's just sort of stream of thought, stream of consciousness, going into the headspace of a writer before they actually are able to start writing. I loved that. By the middle, I thought it was getting really dull. And then the third act, where everything sort of coalesces around the most conventional possible version of a Charlie Kaufman script, I thought worked really well and sort of paid off the expectation that you had going into a movie, but it didn't actually feel like the same film. There's so many different layers of trust and distrust that are built up and torn down over the course of this movie when it comes to what is actually happening literally, that I have a really tough time saying that the movie works super well. It's one of those things, it's very much like you can't get too granular because there's no real purchase for you to hold on to relative to anything else in the movie, because the plot operates through different layers of diegesis. There is no fixed diegesis in this movie, really, which means that you can't actually trust the plot. But the plot somehow works in a linear fashion.
I would say that the only thing that we really have as any sort of truth is that we're existing in some way inside of Charlie Kaufman's head. Because I think from the onset, where it's narrated by him, where we're voicing all of his insecurities, it's the only part that speaks in any way sort of towards the audience, even though it is him talking to himself. I think that establishes it as at least being within his mind, if not existing in the real world.
Right, I agree.
Go ahead.
I agree with that. It's just that it constantly, because it's constantly being rewritten, basically, I don't, even if it's in his mind, I still don't know what I know about this movie. And even if we're going to go so far as to say that the Charlie Kaufman voice in your head and the Charlie Kaufman protagonists are intended to be Charlie Kaufman, the fact that they are Nick Cage in a filmic medium undermines my ability to go along with that, right? Like, part of the Nick Cagey effect here is that, like, it feels like a movie the whole time. There's no way to suspend your disbelief. Disbelief is the medium that he's using to tell this story.
So I'm going to do something really crazy here for longtime listeners of the pod and say I was actually able to suspend my disbelief pretty easily with this movie. I guess
you're a pig. I hate you.
I know, I'm awful. I guess for me, I just saw this as like a weird way of like Charlie Kaufman basically using the audience as a therapist for his like post-success sort of fall off. And so I guess I didn't really have to, even with the Nick Caginess of it, I didn't feel the need to try and place this in any particular real grounded world, because I know that whether it's, you know, in Los Angeles or on a future colony at Mars, the actual action of what's going on is not going to be nearly as important as how this is representing some sort of instability or insecurity through Charlie Kaufman's mind. So I guess like I might have actually read into too much metaphor then, even though like obviously the movie has so much parallelism and, you know, the whole thing is set up to be like a big metaphor and a big meta commentary as well on use some meta there was wrong, whatever. You know, like just commentary on the writing process and the industry of writing, blah, 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 blah. But I think having it grounded in it being sort of his diary led me to, accept a lot of things that were kind of kooky and weird from Nicolas Cage being cast in the first place onwards.
Okay, so I just want to record the date. It is May 29th, 2018, and Connor just made a structuralist argument for the interpretation of a film. Let's just pause, absorb the moment. I agree with you, but I think the metaphorical aspect of it is actually what makes it so confusing to me. Because, like, for me, at the end of the movie, I'm still not convinced that Donald is intended to be an actual character, or if he is intended to be interpreted as a delusion.
Right?
Sure. Okay, Chris, go on about Donald, because that's one of the only two things that I really wanted to talk about for this movie.
You want me to go on about Donald?
Yeah.
Who is Donald? Who is Donald? I don't think we covered him in the summary.
Sure. So go ahead.
Donald is the twin brother of Charlie Kaufman in the film, played by Nick Cage as well, and actually credited as the screenwriter on the movie as well. Right, Connor?
Yes.
And the entire... So Donald exists as a foil to Charlie, who is self-deprecating, depressed, like a shut-in, and Donald is outgoing, confident, kind, a little bit of a douche, like good with girls. We see, and Connor mentioned in our notes that they spend an entire act of the film with Charlie and girls, and then we see Donald have success in that. And the entire time Donald's on screen, you could interpret, and just the way that the movie is, that Donald may or may not exist. I was expecting the big twist at the end to be that Donald was like a separate personality, because that was such a theme that Donald was hitting on, as he was also becoming a screenwriter throughout the film. And yeah, like I said, I don't know. I'm mad that this movie works. I'm really mad that it works, because it's like, if you're writing an essay for some class and you don't have anything, and then you just turn in an essay about you not being able to write your essay, and then your professor's like, great job, here's your A-, and it works, and people like it because it's like, oh, it's about writing. Like it's so... I'm so angry because it shouldn't work, but the movie worked really well.
Yeah, I mean, I think my own sort of headcanon for this movie, which is that, like, even if we accept that for the functional purpose of the movie existing, Donald exists, I think, like, the function of Donald, for me, is actually as a plot structuring device, if that makes sense. Because I think you can divide the sort of beginning, middle, and end feeling into the way that you think about Donald as the plot proceeds linearly. At the beginning, I sort of assumed that he was some sort of fabrication or a delusion, and he sort of behaved like he was one. He was very sort of childish and unexpected, and he kept doing weird things, like appearing on the floor and like waking his brother up in the middle of the night. He's this sort of childish, not quite there thing. And he's also obsessed with being a film writer. In the second act, Donald is more real, but still really weird, right? There's that scene where he and Charlie are at the studio, and Charlie can't really interact with anybody, but Donald interacts with them really well. And in this is sort of the act, the middle is where I see Charlie and Donald both obsessed with love in different ways. And Charlie's inability to interact with the world and Donald's ability to interact with the world here makes Donald feel more real, and in fact more real than Charlie sometimes. So in the middle, I'm not even sure if Charlie is real, because, you know, Charlie and Donald are looking at each other very reflexively, and Donald is the one that's actually doing things. Then in the third act, they both reach this sort of co-equal realness for me, and Charlie and Donald basically go off and do this caper, and then Donald dies, which again kind of makes it feel unreal again. He dies very suddenly, immediately after imparting this lesson that we later see allows Charlie to do the thing he couldn't do the whole time, which is, you know, make the action of doing something possible for him. He actually is able to, you know, kiss the woman that he had been fruitlessly dating for a while. And it's that metaphorical uncertainty, the uncertainty of which of them is real or metaphorical, becomes the central tension of the plot. And so whether or not you buy that Donald is real is sort of the motivating action of understanding the movie.
No,
Like,
for sure. Yeah. I was going to say, I was totally on board with my interpretation of Donald until he died at the end. And that
yeah,
really caught me off guard, because what I saw it as is, so there are two different ways that Charlie sort of, the real Charlie. Oh, wait.
Sorry, a car drove by.
It's okay. Um,
on a scale of 1 to large, how big is your dog?
He weighs smaller than my cat.
he weighs smaller than my cat.
Okay.
He's like one of those wrestler dogs that fasts before weigh-in. It's a bunch of weight afterwards. He's always drinking water when it's time to go to the gym.
All right, that's our intro. Okay, so there are two main ways that Charlie, real person Charlie writer, seems to communicate his internal thoughts. The primary one being through his use of voiceover narration, and despite him pointing out multiple times in the film that it's cheap and that like you're not supposed to do it, which is of course a very common screenwriting lesson, he does it anyways to communicate self-loathing and self-doubt. But there seems to be a more specific manifestation of that in Donald, and that it's sort of like the fresh face of, Charlie Kaufman, the screenwriter, as a new screenwriter, and him feeling perhaps weighted down by his expectations from the originality and the strangeness of being John Malkovich. As they're even saying at that dinner with his new agent or the producer, to talk about how crazy and inventive and wild and weird being John Malkovich was. And so he feels this expectation that he has to keep defying all these rules and making things that are crazy and new. And for me, I saw Donald as him imagining what his career would have been like if he was still green and hadn't had all the expectations placed on him. And that's where his self-loathing for his current situation comes from, because he sees if he just, sold out and wrote a normal thriller that wasn't original and, just was what people had always seen and what people would still pay a lot of money to go see, he would be more confident because, I don't know, he'd have an easier time. There wouldn't be so much expectation placed on him. He could crank things out. And so there's simultaneously like him being very pretentious about his own situation and the expectations placed on him, but it's also a very real insecurity that, we're all pretty young. I don't think we've hit our first peak yet, but that you see in a lot of people.
Young?
we're on a global scale, but yeah, there's that sort of insecurity that I imagine after one of us like gets a first like huge job or has some big life event, the expectations of following it up and wondering if things would have been easier if you hadn't done that, if you'd be able to restart in the same path you're going down now with more confidence and perhaps assuredness. But then when he dies at the end, I'm like, oh wait, no, so he was actually like a real part of this story. And then I had to abandon my structuralist argument and think of it like, oh shit, this is an actual movie with a plot. Like,
right?
I don't know.
No, such a knife in the back for the people that were going along with the movie for the first 2 acts.
Right? And then you're like,
and you're like, wait, no, this is huh? Like,
you can't
so,
do all of this.
One more thing about Donald that I think is really interesting, since it's like pretty filmically obvious that Donald is what Charlie is not, I think it sort of tells you, because of the self-loathing aspect in Charlie, what Donald has or is doing tells you a lot about the Charlie character by active negation, right? Like, what Charlie wants at the beginning is to be writing a film. And what Donald is doing is writing a film by embracing all of these tools that Charlie has this innate distrust of. In the second act, Donald has love because he's doing the things that Charlie's terrified of but desperately wants to be able to do. In the third act, it's not career or love that he's interested in. Donald is sort of at peace in a way that Charlie isn't in the third act. And that little like soliloquy, the most tropey and yet somehow greatest line in the movie, you're what you love, not what loves you, becomes this sort of like vindication of Charlie apart from his self-loathing, which is really, I think it's really an interesting device. And then Donald dies, which means that he was actually a person. Like, there's also there's a linear progression through the movie where it becomes progressively less strange, right? The beginning is the weirdest. It starts at the beginning of time, right? And by the end, like, that third act is a pretty conventional late 90s, like, prestige thriller, right? Like, it kind of feels a little like Wild Things to me in the third section.
Yeah, I can see
where,
that.
like, Meryl Streep is going into the swamp to do drugs. Like, and it's almost like Donald's death is the final acquiescence to trope, and he goes from being unreal to being real.
And so now here's the money question. Why was Nicolas Cage the perfect person to play both of these roles? Not all at once.
I mean, I have thoughts. Are we waiting for an order or something?
Nope. We can open it up to whoever. Just make sure cut the dead space.
Cut. Snip,
I was
snip,
gonna
snip.
leave it all in.
Sorry, Chris.
I hate you.
So I think Nick Cage is like Nick Caginess, right? Like, the fact that he is Nick Cage apart from the diegesis all the time makes you go along with all of these weird warpy twists and turns. Like, the original casting for this movie had Tom Hanks playing Charlie and Donald, right?
Oh my god.
Ooh,
Yeah,
that's a
right. That would have
completely
been
different
such a
film.
strange movie, right? Like, post Forrest Gump, Tom Hanks in all of his power as America's dad, trying to do this role. I just don't see it because, like, Tom Hanks kind of, he's like not as much of a character, right? He's an archetype. Nick Cage is a character, right? If that makes sense. Like, without going too deep into my theory about why you should always cast unknowns and never cast celebrities. Like, I also think there's the fact that Nick Cage always plays things too big and too small at the same time, again, pulls you out of the easy interpretation of this is literally happening. Because a lot of my distrust of the Donald is real feeling is that it's Nick Cage. That entire layer of unreality is more or less a product of, like, 90% Nick Cage being there and 10% Spike Jonze being behind the camera. Which is impressive because Spike Jonze is not what you would call a subtle director.
No, he's only made normal movies.
Okay, I am never leaving my children alone in a room with Connor. Chris,
you want to?
Thoughts?
Yeah, I was making sure I wasn't muted. So, yeah, just kind of echoing what Kyle said. Nick Cage is perfect for this because he exists in this kind of meta narrative of Nick Cage already, and I guess this is kind of a hindsight thing. I would have different feelings had I watched this in 2002, but, like, he exists as his own kind of Nick Cage is a character, and then seeing Nick Cage in this movie already pulls you out a little bit, to a point where your relationship with the meta-ness of the film is kind of, from the get-go, you agree to it, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's because it's harder to lose yourself in this as being a true story when you're saying this is an actor, and especially for a movie that has such a meta commentary about the film industry, to cast someone who is recognizable as an actor above all else and a career professional is a great way to make your audience focus less on, what's going on in the world. Are we doing world building? What's going on here? And more about My structuralist argument. You know
Right.
what he could mean. Yeah.
Well, and
But I think it's really important that it was Nick Cage and not just another famous actor, right? Tom Hanks was the alternative that reality provided us. Imagine if it was Christian Bale, right? Like somebody who literally vanishes via method acting into every role. Like that would not be the same movie. In fact, I don't think it would be a better movie. I think it would be a worse movie.
Agreed. And also, I think to her credit, Meryl Streep also does a great job also portraying. I feel like at this point, I know Meryl Streep personally. Like while I was watching this movie, I was like, I feel like I've seen her across so many different timelines that don't actually exist, that she's like a familiar relative. And just in the cast in general, this cast was like surprisingly stacked. Like we have Tilda Swinton as
who did nothing.
She did
Like,
nothing. She's
that
billed
was the smallest
like
Tilda Swinton performance I've ever seen. I didn't know she could act that small. It's so interesting.
As well,
everybody's playing against type. Maybe that's the secret to the casting of this movie.
That's not a bad observation.
What else was it? Maggie Gyllenhaal was also in it.
You are so bad at pronouncing things today. Oh my god.
Okay, we're gonna rewind. We're gonna rewind.
No. We're keeping all this in.
At this point, we cut back to you pronouncing it adaptation.
Oh yeah.
No, I said
I didn't want to make fun of you for that. But...
No. I said adaptation, but when I said adaptation, I meant that he was like his adaptation of.
Yeah, it's faithful adaptation.
His faithful adaptation.
There's always an A there.
Adaptation.
It's okay, Booby. I love you.
God damn it.
Shit, God damn it. So on the Meryl Streep point, I think everybody's playing against type thing, with maybe the exception of Chris what's his face, who actually won the best supporting actor, the dude who played the Swamp Man.
Chris Cooper playing John LaRoche.
Yes. So he I think is less far afield in him playing like Hick with a Heart of Gold. Maybe it's the Heart of Gold part. I've seen him primarily as like gruff, like stoic people. So Nick Cage is playing a weird character, which is not that strange, but he's playing two weird characters, and he's also sort of embracing his Nick Caginess to make the performance more effective. That said, I think this is pretty subtle work for him in a lot of ways. As much as we harp on like his innate bigness, the actual performances are pretty subtly calibrated. And seeing him play the opposite of himself actually makes me respect his acting style a lot more. Meryl Streep has two modes in most of the work she does. There's the like modern Meryl Streep who's like a chameleonic mimic. The one that is most familiar to us. That's like Julia Childs and Julia and Julia, Margaret Thatcher and Iron Lady. That's where she like goes ham on the accent. She finds the voice. She gets covered in prosthetics, and she gets nominated for an Oscar because she wanders in front of a camera. Then there's the like, I think of it as the more classic Meryl Streep, which is like the Deer Hunter, Kramer versus Kramer, where it's not so much that she's methoding herself into the roles, it's that she's folding the roles into all of those like Streepisms, right? Especially in the eye work, where she's, darting back and forth all the time and very internal. I think this movie is her not only doing classic Meryl Streep, maybe for the last time, it's also her playing a character that isn't as misunderstood or as misanthropic as some of her other like classic work is. Like, the character of Susan Orleans is kind of, especially in the beginning of the movie, is really weird, right? She doesn't really do anything except write a book. And then at the end, it feels more Streepian because she like makes this realization and goes through a metamorphosis or whatever. But like, I don't see this as a classic Meryl Streep role, and I don't see this as like the most tropey deployment of Meryl Streep because she's playing against type. And like, I mean, you can keep doing that. Like Brian Cox starts as like Mr. Screamy, I know everything, the actor or a screenwriting studio guy. And then you go to a bar and have a drink with him. I don't think I've seen Brian Cox in like a paternal role in a really long time.
Yeah.
Until the Swinton playing like a perfectly pleasant movie executive. No. How? No. This is the woman who was a MoMA exhibit of herself.
For sure. I think you're pointing out at the transition of the Meryl Streep dichotomy throughout the movie lines up pretty interestingly with how much she's being constructed by on-screen Charlie. Because it seems like as the movie's getting going, Charlie's just pretty much doing a faithful adaptation straight from the book. But as he realizes that she's, not actually that interesting of a person, this is Susan Orlean, that is, that Susan's not really that interesting of a person. There's not a whole lot of an arc there. He writes in the drug problem. He writes in, the sexploitation, and he writes in, her having this secret love affair, all things that he said he wasn't going to do because they're tropes of screenwriting. And as that happens, you're right. Yeah, Meryl becomes this like you said, she transitions into this new form. I don't think, I would never go far enough to say that this is a commentary on Meryl Streep's acting, but it is interesting to see how your perceived dichotomy of the Meryl Streep lines up with how constructed and cliched her role becomes.
Yeah, I mean, again, this movie feels like it went from like a art housey, modern-ish feeling movie to being an old-fashioned, like, this movie was made for adults in the late 80s and early 90s. Like, her whole like swamp dialogue also has a little bit of resonance for me. Oh God, what was that movie with Jodie Foster and Liam Neeson where Jodie Foster was raised in the woods and doesn't speak a language recognized by most people?
Nell.
What's it?
Did you say Elf?
Yeah.
Nell.
Oh.
Yes, Elf. The movie Elf.
No, the movie Nell, Nell.
Yes,
Okay,
it is
okay.
Nell, actually. Thank you. Yeah, like, I don't know. This is such a strange, like, I don't know how much of this could reasonably be intentional. It feels like Charlie Kaufman kept discovering these weird little tricks that he could pull on you and just kept doing it. Right? Like,
Well,
it's difficult for me to imagine that someone set out with even a small subset of the narrative goals that this film accomplishes? Question mark.
I think accomplishes an interesting word. So we got time for like one more thing, and I want to talk about the theme of disappointment in the movie and how it's kind of hard to pick up on when you're watching it. Because around the end of the second act, once Charlie realizes that he's never going to be able to do a successful movie that's just about flowers, it's a faithful adaptation that aligns with Susan realizing that she's never going to see a ghost orchid, or that when she did, it wasn't really what she expected it to be, and that her dreams start to feel kind of fruitless and feel passionless. That's when all of the tropes that, as I've said a couple times now, that were mentioned earlier by Charlie, the in movie Charlie as being stupid and cliched, specifically things like action sequences or chases or needless romance and murder and things like that, start to get written into the script. And so that does, like you're saying, Kyle, make for an exciting third act, because it feels like, this kind of throwback to 70s, 80s movies that were made for adults. But when you walk out and you think, what made that so exciting? It's everything that would have disappointed the writer Charlie from the earlier part of the movie. Because he has a success, and he has the exciting end of the movie. Everything works out both in the movie and at the same time with the movie as an object, but as an object outside of watching the movie. But he used everything that he would have been disappointed in, and he sort of absorbs that part of Donald that was a crappy writer and that wrote pulpy stuff that wasn't meant to be capital A art, that was just meant to sell the things. just that reflection of disappointment and how disappointment doesn't always look like a failure that's going to be redeemed in the third act, but sometimes disappointment looks like things working out for all of the wrong reasons.
Well, and I think it's interesting how he built that into both the text, subtext, and meta of the narrative, right? Like the subtext of disappointment's there from the start, right? Like he is disappointed in everything. It's impossible for him to be appointed, right?
Sure.
And then you get to Donald's like stick it to the quick line, right? You are what you love and not what loves you, right?
Mm-hmm.
That reflexive, right? Like it gets at disappointment from the other way, right? Like disappointment's a part of life, but it doesn't define you. As like I feel like that's the thing that Charlie Kaufman, the author outside of the movie, is telling himself in order to be able to write the tropey ending. And there's a truth in that allows him to do the thing that on the surface he doesn't want to do. And then in the meta, yes, there's like his disappointment becomes the text of a movie that brought him great praise. Like it becomes almost like a fractal. You can keep zooming out and seeing a different way that the like unhappy people writing about unhappy people becomes a theme that just sort of continues to circle in on itself.
For sure. Chris, you want to add anything?
Yeah, just that, like though he does cave into everything, that all the cliches and stuff, and I'm so mad that it actually works. Like that's why it works though, is because he spent 2/3 of this movie kind of building up these or this character and all these characters who exist both in his own mind and in the mind of the movie. And like the reason we're even talking about this movie is because it is both incredibly tropey, but also a meta commentary on this. Like had he written the end of the movie being like with really no like I don't know how you would end, I guess, the story of him writing this adaptation. Maybe you just finish it with like, and I didn't write it or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
if there's a version of this movie that is very just depressing, like made like an indie film, like would have, like there's an indie film version of this, and then there's like the cult classic version that we have now. And it is only that cult classic because of what he does, if that makes sense.
You know, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, so all that is to say, I this is one of those examples of when you can break the rules because you're good at writing.
Break and then follow and then break the following of and yada yada.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it works because he broke every rule, not
Yeah.
because he broke a couple of them, which is, you know, non-conventionally true.
Sure.
I'm just so mad
Because it worked?
because he's basically like, oh, I don't know how to end this. Oh, well, it'd be funny if I just do everything I'm not supposed to do, but it's okay because I know I'm not supposed to do it.
Yeah, there is a certain smugness that damn it, if he wasn't such a good writer, I'd be upset about. But,
right?
Mm-hmm. But alas, he is that good of a writer.
He is.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think it's looking like it's about time. Want to give some last thoughts?
Sure.
All right, Kyle, take it away.
Oh gosh, I'm unready.
All right, Chris, take it away.
Okay. Adaptation is a great movie to follow up Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. If you're a big fan of the kind of style that movie was, I think this is, out of all of his films, this is the one that reminded me the most. That didn't come out right, but you know what I mean.
You're editing it.
And I'm just gonna start over
Go ahead.
because it'll make my job easier.
We love you.
Wow.
This movie is a great movie to watch, both if you're a big fan of Nick Cage, because it's something different. And I know fans of Nick Cage do exist. My friend had pictures of him up in her locker throughout high school. And
Who's your
Friend's
friend?
weird.
Say your first and last name.
my friend,
Is it Christina?
no, it's Camila Bake.
I was just bleep all that.
Camila Bake.
Is that name disguised in accordance with our GDPR privacy policy?
Correct. Camila Bake.
Okay, great. The D stands for duck.
Oh, I like that a lot. All right, sorry. Keep going.
Yeah, Adaptation is a really interesting. See, I still don't know how I feel about it. Like, I'm not mad that I watched it. I really enjoyed it, but
did you really?
Yeah, oh my gosh, your coworker was right. It's like pretty easy to watch, but really hard to put into words. Yeah, give it a watch. That's my that's my 2 cents.
All right, Kyle.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. Chris, you got to give it a rating.
I will give it 1 Charlie Kaufman gray duck that
okay.
Damn it. Where did they Okay, nope. I'm gonna start over.
Go back to start the rating over again. One more time.
Fucking God.
This time, can you change your opinion so that it's more plot tropey?
Sorry?
I was making a bad joke. It's real hard to make jokes about this. Keep going.
Is that your doorbell?
No.
Oh, it was the piano.
That was my soul.
I'm gonna give it 1 gray duck, but the gray duck.
Oh wow!
The gray duck exists as the twin of another gray duck, and we're not sure if this gray duck actually exists or not. And it's up to your own interpretation as to whether this is actually a gray duck or not. It's an open-ended ending.
A rare, clean gray duck.
No. It's not a clean gray duck. You don't know if it's a gray duck or not. You have to decide for yourself.
If it exists, it's a clean gray duck. We're deep into metaphysics now. My turn?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I also I'm fully willing to acknowledge this as a work of genius. I'm not sure that I will be delving back into this movie soon. I think it might be more interesting than it is good, but that's not a bad goal for a movie. And even if they arrived at that goal accidentally, I think it's like weird enough that it justifies its own existence by sheer force of novelty. I think what I like in movies when they go the route of being sort of let's do a movie that is unique rather than a movie that is good. I like when they make all of the bold choices and not just 1 or 2, because incongruity is almost as dangerous as boredom when it comes to movies like this. And I think the fact that Charlie Kaufman, the real person outside the existential quandaries posed by the movie, did in fact go the whole hog in a way that is pretty cool, even if I'm not sure if I like it. I think I like it. Again, still pitching my tent there. I'm definitely glad it exists, and I think it represents really, really interesting work for just about everybody involved in the movie. Like, the actors are doing really interesting things. The direction is really interesting. of course, the script is interesting. Overall, yeah, I think like if you consider yourself a film person, you have to watch this movie. If you're not a film person, I would encourage that you look elsewhere. Like just about anywhere elsewhere. In terms of like overall, I'm glad this thing exists. Good on you, all involved. That's not always true of movies. For my duck rating, I'm going to give this a duck, Donald Duck, Gray Duck, because there was a Donald in the movie, but also because it kind of invites you to do things rather than self-criticize in a really interesting way, even if what you're doing is self-criticism. like the maker's imperative of this movie is something I can get behind. And I think all three of us have sort of independent artistic ambitions to varying extents. And I think that a movie that deals so frankly with the trials and travails, not just as byproducts, but in fact essential elements of the creation process, is a valuable thing. So yeah, like Duck, Donald Duck, Gray Duck is what I'm going with.
All right. And go ahead.
Sorry, before you do your final thoughts, we should have asked this earlier. Are you guys a Donald or a Charlie?
I'm a Charlie.
Yeah, I'm a Charlie that definitely has a Donald living within me.
I'm a Charlie when my blood alcohol content is within the legal limit.
I think I'm a Donald.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a Donald.
That means we just all got to work together. Got to start cohabitating.
Well, what it really means is Connor and I need to fight to the death, and then one of us gets to work with Chris forever.
And then we die.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Then the winner also, as a byproduct, gets the right of killing Chris in an automobile accident.
Nice.
And then writes a successful movie on it.
I think it's worth it, frankly. Sorry, guys.
Adaptation 2, still adapting.
Adaptation 2, Adaptation.
Okay. So, final thoughts for me. As someone who would like to write movies professionally one day, this was simultaneously a very inspiring movie to break out of my current not writing rut, and also a horribly depressing and demoralizing. Again, kind of like you said, it's a really great movie to study and to think about and to mull over, but I don't know that I appreciated all those elements while going through the hour and 50-minute long runtime. My rating for this movie is 2 ducks in an optical illusion where they're both drawing each other.
Is that necessarily an optical illusion? Okay, no, I think
no. I'm going to start
one duck eating itself.
An Ouroboros duck.
What's that?
A Malaboros? I don't know.
An Ouroboros?
Right. It was a joke.
No, yeah, it's from the movie.
Oh.
I got it.
Oh, okay.
All right, now that we're derailing, I think it's the best time to end. All right, so thank you for joining us for the first episode of the Nick Cage block of the Duck, Duck, Gray Duck. Turn in next week when it all starts to go downhill. All right, signing off. This is Connor.
This is Kyle.
This isn't our ending. Fuck.
Duck.
Yeah.
All right. And signing off, Duck.
Duck.
Gray Duck.
Oh,
all right.
Gray Duck.
Oh, I
You got it, Chris. We're good. We're done. We're not doing that again.
See you next week. All right. So
we need our ad, Connor.
Oh, that's fine. Well, can we recycle an ad for a different movie and just put it into this one, like with the movie's name, like just clearly spliced from something else?
First person to think of a duck pun that can be an ad just improvises.
Mattress stores aren't all they're quacked up to be. That's why we sponsor Casper Mattress, because they.
Big fan.
Casper mattress for all your quacking needs.
What?
I don't know.
No.
Quacking supposed to be like fucking there? Or
Yeah, no. Chris, you can save it. Casper mattress for all your ducking needs.
Oh, that was so much better.
All right, that's good.
All right.
Who wants to grade up next week, and what do you want to watch?